Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Daily Adler podcast, where we're interviewing Adlerians about individual psychology and their career and their work. Today, we are so lucky to have Dr. Tim Hartshorne with us. Thanks, Tim, for joining.
Happy to be here. Looking forward to
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, us too. So we tend to start these interviews off by just being curious about how you came to find Adler or the ideas of individual psychology. What sort of hooked you?
You know, when I was early in attending NASAP conferences, I would ask that question of random people, and they always said, "Well, it's kind of interesting. It was a bit by accident." And I think it probably always is. But in 1974, I left middle of New York State and moved to Austin, Texas, where I started my doctoral degree in school psychology at the University of Texas, Austin. And my very first class, which was adolescent development through high school, was being taught by this guy, Guy Manister. And of course, I had no idea who he was. And I was not terribly impressed right at the beginning because he seemed a little sarcastic. And he walks in and says, "Well, I only teach classes at night." It was a night class because I don't like the daylight. And where's this guy coming from? But over the course of the semester, I came to really, really enjoy him and enjoy the class. Almost to kind of like a hero worship kind of thing that, ooh, there's Guy Manister, you know. And people said to me, "Oh, he's an Adlerian." And once we talked him into teaching a class on Adler, maybe we can talk him into doing it again. So we did talk him into doing it again. And the fall of 75, he taught the course Adlerian, it's like Adlerian, probably Adlerian psychology and lifestyle or something like that, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And partway through the course, he announced that there's going to be a conference in Houston of the North American Society of Adlerian Psychology. In those days, NASEP had two conferences a year, one in the fall and one in the spring. Um, it was quite large, 1,200 members and at least, and very, very active. And so um, my wife and I agreed we'd go to it just to see what this Adlerian conference might be all about. So my very first NASAP conference was fall of 75.
Wow.
Um, and I don't remember a lot about it. I hung out a bit with Bob Armstrong and his friend, and Bob later became president of NASAP. He was from Vancouver. Um, I don't remember the friend's name, and I asked Bob once, probably the last time I saw him, which has been a long time, what happened to your friend? And he didn't know what I was talking about, but that's who I spent time with. But I know I went and heard Bob Powers, so that clearly made an impression on me. And my wife went to a session with Kurt Adler where he was doing a lifestyle. And I did
Mhm.
attend that one. I'm not sure if that was kind of to let her do her thing or what it was. Somewhere, someplace, there's probably still a cassette recording because she volunteered to have her lifestyle done. And it was really interesting. And Kurt didn't follow any organized structural kind of thing. He just asked questions, right? You can see he's putting it all together in his head. But those are the two things I remember most about it, other than I like this stuff. And I started reading the stuff. And I was teaching educational psychology for students going into secondary schools. And so I adopted actually Maintaining Sanity in the Classroom, which is Dreiker's Grunwald and Pepper, as a textbook for that class. I never told the guy who was supervising all the sections because he wanted us to use this behavior mod book, which I dropped in favor of,
Yeah.
of the Dreikers. And I just found that it taught my students so much. And of course, at the same time, it was teaching me. And so that was probably the that book. And then also later reading Children the Challenge
Mhm.
was also extremely influential. And Guy Manister eventually taught a course on parenting. And there were only, I think, four students in the room, but most of the class was Guy and me debating. It was but we again looked at that book as well as some others. So kind of as it developed, I became more and more sensing that I must be Adlerian.
Mm.
I had a master's in counseling, and during that time, I thought I was existential. But that's not so, you can easily incorporate an existential perspective with Adler, so that was never a problem. And Guy and I became quite close. And for a while, he was giving me copies of the journal, so I didn't have to subscribe or officially join ASAP. But eventually, I realized like when I moved away from Austin, I kind of had to do that. So, um, yeah, I've been around a long time, and at that point, which I'm sure Dale is, the other two are younger, but it's like I don't have to think about, well, what would Adler say, or what would be the Adlerian perspective on that? It's what I say and my perspective, and it's just Adlerian. It's the way I see life. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's a big part of me.
Yeah.
Early on, ASAP was just, and also went to the international a number of times. It was a chance to spend time with Guy more than anything else.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, eventually got involved, and the rest is history.
Ah, thanks for letting us into some of that, and also thanks for your
Yeah.
contributions to the field and to keeping the Adlerian flame alive.
You
How did
mentioned
it? Oh, sorry, go for it, Shay.
you mentioned working with children. What drew you into working with children as a
Well, I mostly worked, I like every age. That's kind of the thing. Um, I was a high school guidance counselor, so I'm working with adolescents. I loved them. They loved me. It was really, really fun. In school psychology, obviously, we're doing a lot of testing with students, but I never actually, other than my internship, practiced school psychology. I wanted to become a trainer of school psychologists, which seems kind of an odd thing, but I'd actually got a compliment once from a practicing school psychologist. He said, Tim, for a trainer, you really seem to understand what it's like for us, working the job. And yay. But, um, some experience with younger kids there. I did student teaching actually with junior high. I loved middle school. I love seventh and eighth grade, and not enough people love them, which is a big problem because if
Yeah.
you can get them engaged in a positive direction, their lives are going to go very, very well. But it's
Mm.
it's really hard sometimes because they irritate everybody so much because they're just goofy, and so you have
Mm.
to appreciate their goofiness and forgive them because that's just what they're doing. They're trying to figure out all this social stuff and academic stuff and who they might turn out to be and which direction they want to go. And um, so it's a very vibrant time. I
Mm.
also love teaching graduate school. I taught graduate school for 44 years. I also taught undergraduates for 33 of those years. I've enjoyed every age group. Eh,
That's great.
Mhm. Okay, when you answered our form, you had mentioned that psychology of use is this concept that sticks out for you. Why do you think that's been so valuable for you, either in your work or your personal life?
did I say psychology of use? Because I've been thinking I said all behavior has a purpose, but maybe I said psychology of use. Okay, I'll go with psychology of use, even though my mind's been thinking about the other. But I think one reason why that is so important to me is that I'm the father of a young man. Well, he's 36. He's not that young, with severe disabilities.
Mm.
And yet, this kid who's non-vocal, very odd in his behaviors, um, he transforms people's lives all the time.
Mm.
It just, it astounds me because clearly it's not about what he possesses. It's what he does with what he possesses, even not always
Mm.
consciously.
Mm.
I mean, you say, well, how can a kid, or he's still a kid to me, how can this guy who, you know, doesn't talk and doesn't engage with people all that much. And, he's got some jobs he does. He returns bottles and cans because in Michigan, they're 10 cents each. And so he collects the money and he donates it to the foundation, which supports his disability. And he works in a children's museum, taking pegs out of a kind of a large light bright and sanitizing them and putting them back. Um, but how does he go about changing lives? And it's because, and he doesn't do it for everybody, right? But 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 so many people find just spending time with him and figuring out the relationship makes them think differently about themselves.
Mm.
Hmm.
And so, there's one guy, he was a photojournalism major, needs a senior project. I don't know how he found out about Jacob, but he said, I'd like to follow your kid around for a semester and taking pictures, which he did. And some of them that he kept is gorgeous pictures. But guess what? He's a special education teacher now.
Mm.
And we had one of the girls that worked with him. She was wanting to work with juvenile delinquents, early childhood special education. Right? It's what she does now. And when you ask some of the people what they got out of it, one of the things that everybody mentions is learning patience.
Hmm.
But one girl did this. I have a recording of it somewhere, but she says, when I go into Jacob's house, and Jacob lives in his own house next door to our house, actually, when he has 24/7 workers, or so he's never alone. He's always with somebody. Says, when I go into Jacob's house, I'm going into Jacob's world.
Hmm.
And, if there's something that he wants, he tries to tell me. And sometimes I don't quite understand exactly what he's asking for, but I know that if I hang in with him, eventually I will get it,
Mm.
and then things will go very well. And I kind of love that because it is kind of you have to go into his space and understand what it's like from his perspective of somebody he's deaf-blind. He's got a little bit of vision in his left eye, right eye, left eye. I'm always forgetting. um, left eye. And so he uses his vision quite well. But so he can't hear you when you speak. We use a combination of sign and pictures for basic communication, or he just does what he wants. We had one of his workers was from Mount Pleasant, Michigan, where I live, and her mom knew this Native American healer, and said, "Well, would you like to have him come over and assess Jacob?" Why not? What would be the downside other than
Hmm.
he doesn't charge anything, but you can give him a donation of around $50. I said, okay, we'll do that. But he came over and he went over to Jacob and he kind of put his hand over his body and he said he's really hot in his gut and his intestine, his stomach. And I
Mm.
think that's where the big issue is. And he was absolutely right. That is where the big issue is. But then he stood back away from Jacob and talked for a while about, things you might do and asking questions. And then towards the end, he said, you may have noticed I've not gotten close to Jacob because he is really powerful. I'm afraid if I got too close to him, he'd knock me over.
Hmm.
I thought that was the power of Jacob.
Wow.
And we've
Wow.
done presentations called The Power of Jacob when I get his caregivers to talk about the ways he's changed their lives.
Mm.
So the psychology of use, yeah, he
Hmm.
doesn't have a lot of basic gifts, you'd think. He
Hmm.
can barely see you and he can't hear you and he's balance problems, so it's not easy for him to walk around in unfamiliar
Hmm.
places. And um, but he's got something going. I envy because he really, really does use what he has to make a difference in the world. And that's what the psychology of use is all about, is not possession. We all know people who are wealthy and popular and, whatever, and they're doing nothing with it.
Hmm.
And then there are people like Jacob who has very little, but he uses everything he's got and makes a difference in the world.
Wow. That's such a powerful story, Tim.
Thanks.
Wow. Oh, I don't know what to say about that. That's amazing. Hmm.
We all
Yeah, is there
find
any?
ways to contribute, and it sounds like he's
Yeah.
done that.
Right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm not even sure to what extent he knows he's contributing. I'd like to say, oh, he has a plan, but I don't
Wow.
know if you know Rob Guttenberg, but he composed a song about Jacob, and
Hmm.
he says Jacob has a plan. That's part of those lyrics. I don't know if Jacob has a plan, but he's living the best life.
Wow. Yeah, see, I was thinking that that came from Kurt Adler, the idea of psychology of use, and but you're saying, wow, it came from your son.
Well, I'm sure it came from Kurt Adler, and I knew the
Yeah,
concept, but
yeah.
that's why I love the concept so much, is because I think it describes the way we should be living our lives and not being concerned about what we have as possessions, personally or even objectively. But what can I do? How can I contribute? I mean, Adlerian psychology is all about, you know, contributing, making contributions. And there's all sorts of ways to make contributions. And we think of it through the life tasks sometimes. But I mean, I was actually walking outside when the garbage collectors were coming by, picking up trash, and I called out to them, "Thank you for everything that you do." They looked
Mhm.
very startled and didn't really respond. But really, that's a huge contribution that we would sorely miss if we didn't have it. And we don't
Mhm.
appreciate that enough, of all the contributions that everybody is making, regardless of what they've got.
Mhm. Mhm. And that's so Adlerian, the idea of we see people's strengths and help them to be strong in what they're doing. Oh wow. Yeah. That's amazing.
And I know a lot of your contributions professionally have been around charge syndrome.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, anything you want to sort of inform people about that, or any way that people could support that effort?
You know, when Jacob was born, very, very little was known about charge. And that's an acronym for the uh, major, well, at that time, what were thought were the major anomalies. Um, and so my wife and I, both being psychologists, we thought, well, we read everything we could find,
Hmm.
right? And the very first conference was held. Jacob's born in 89. The first conference was 93 in St. Louis. And I actually presented on there on parent-professional relationships, because I got that unique situation where I'm both a parent and a professional, and we fight all the time. So I did a presentation on that. Um, and there was a guy there from Australia who said, "We're going to have an Australian conference next year." And I said, "Rob, send me a letter of invitation to present. I can probably get my university to fund me." So I got to Australia in 94, and I've done both conferences there every other year. From
Hmm.
then to, I just got back from New Zealand, which is the Australasian group where I
Oh,
presented
wow.
again. But I found out back in 96. Yeah, 96. And I was in Sydney, Australia, and they asked me to be on a panel about behavioral issues. And from my perspective, and we all know that we operate on the basis of our own perceptions, right? From my
Hmm.
perception, Jacob does not have behavioral problems.
Hmm.
But so I get to this conference, and I'm sitting on this panel, and parents are describing what their kids are doing, and I am floored. I couldn't believe the kids were such behavioral problems and challenges, and aggressive and um, self-abusive and all sorts of kinds of stuff. And so the next year, which had been 97, right? Yep.
Hmm.
We were in Boston for the Charge Conference. And there was a presentation there from some people from Perkins School for the Blind, the Deaf Blind program, about behavior. And I thought, geez, we really need a psychologist to look at this stuff.
Hmm.
I thought, wait a minute, Tim, you're a psychologist.
That's you.
Yeah, well, why don't you look at this stuff?
Yeah, this
And
guy.
it really took a lot of the courage to be imperfect, because this was not my
Hmm.
area of expertise within psychology. I mean, sure, typical, stupid behavior about the kids engaged in the classroom, that's fine.
Hmm.
But the kind of behavior that we're seeing with kids with this particular disability was kind of overwhelming me. And for years, I would start every presentation on behavior by saying, I don't really understand the behavior, but this is what I get. And now I think today I do understand the behavior, but deciding to publish the first study on behavior, right?
Hmm.
First, support my self-esteem. But did that, and then started working with my students, both graduate and undergraduate. Formed a lab. I didn't know about labs actually, because school psychologists don't have research labs typically, but my colleagues in the department were all forming labs, so okay, I'll have a lab. And I had that lab
Hmm.
for a lot of, well, until I retired, and we churned out dissertations, and even some of the undergraduate papers got published. So we
Hmm.
just started, you know, we'd
Hmm.
have every lab meeting, we'd have like 5 ideas of things to do, and then we'd do one. And um, I didn't know that. I never thought of myself. I thought of myself as a teacher, not a
Hmm.
researcher, but the passion for research. And it wasn't to become a great researcher. It was just turning out the studies because they were so interesting and so
Hmm.
appreciated. I had two doctoral students who've been working with different faculty for their masters, but for various reasons, each one was able to attend a charge syndrome conference. And they came back, and the first one, Ben said to me, Tim, I caught the charge bug. Can I switch to you for my dissertation?
Uh,
Another one pussyfooted around it for a while, and people saying, I think Bree would like to be in the lab. I said, she could be in the lab.
hmm.
Then she finally came to me and said, Tim, I want to be in the lab because when we were at that conference and all your other students had posters, parents were coming by saying, "Oh, this is so helpful. Thank you so much for doing this. This is
Hmm.
really meaningful." I don't want to do that kind of research, right? The stuff I done in my master's thesis, and no one's ever going to use it. This
Hmm.
stuff people will use. And I think that's why it was so exciting for me to get wrapped up in it. Maybe this is kind
Uh,
of psychology of use too. I not
Sounds
necessarily
like it.
possess a
Yeah.
lot of good background in behavior and severe disability or um, research methods, although I knew research methods all right, um, but boy, the the desire to contribute something to a group of people
Mm.
internationally, yeah, that
Hmm.
was what I
Satisfying.
wanted to
Yeah,
do.
it sounds rewarding for sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
And you'll be contributing at the conference this year as the Ansbacher lecture. Can you talk a little
yes.
bit about what you're going to talk about then?
Give us a little bit of what you're going to say.
I can, I'm still working on it. I've been working on it for months. And then I think,
No
oh,
pressure, right?
I didn't say that quite right. Let me change it. So it's on invisibility,
Okay.
and I'm not even sure how I came up with the topic. I was up on Lake Superior. We have a place up on Lake Superior on the beach, and I was there by myself and thinking about Ansbacher lecture, and I thought, invisibility, I don't know. But the basic concept is many of us keep ourselves invisible to other people regarding certain issues that are
Mhm.
challenging for us. And I'm going to talk specifically about grief,
Mhm.
and I'll also talk about disability because they're the two things I know the best.
Mhm.
So for grief, you're supposed to be over this pretty quickly.
Mhm.
And now the DSM will diagnose you if you're not,
Mhm.
right? And that's
Yeah.
supposed to be helpful because then you can get treatment. Yeah, that's stupid. You can get treatment without the diagnosis.
Yeah, that's right.
But um, you're if it's a really significant loss, you're typically given like a year.
Mhm.
And after that, no. And so there's some hesitation already to keep that part of yourself invisible.
Mhm.
But when you get the courage, you're sitting with somebody and it seems like a reasonable thing to say, well, I experienced this loss. Sometimes the reaction that you get is just, I wouldn't say hurtful, but it
Mhm.
feels like I'm not being seen.
Mhm.
They say, oh, I'm so sorry. Everybody says that.
Hmm.
If you're on Facebook at all and somebody dies, you just read the comments. So sorry for your loss. So sorry for your loss. So sorry for your loss. So sorry. Meaningless. Right? I'm
Hmm.
so sorry because that means I have to take care of them now. Oh, I don't want you to be sorry. It's okay. Right? It's
Hmm.
okay.
Good
And then
point.
they change the conversation.
Hmm.
And you say, well, that was kind of a waste. Why did I come out of myself to share something that's so profoundly? I mean, I lost two children in a car accident. And that's, so I'm really coming from a place of deep grief, even 34 years later. That doesn't go away. But you don't tell people, you don't tell people that because oh, let me
Hmm.
diagnose you right away because obviously there's something wrong with you. You're not
Hmm.
supposed to be in grief that many
Hmm.
years later. Although when I talk to parents who have lost children, because I ran our local chapter of Compassionate Friends, which is the support group for bereaved parents, did that for 12 years. I know a lot of bereaved parents, and we just don't let people know, right?
Hmm.
You keep it secret.
Wow.
People say, well, how many kids do you have? And I'll say, well, do I want to say five or seven? So
Hmm.
I've gotten these days to more often saying, well, I got a bunch of them. Oh, well, how old are they? And then I can go through the length, right? But
Hmm.
do I want to actually say, well, yeah, I lost two children, and I don't know because so being invisible is
Hmm.
protection, it's self-guarding, safeguarding, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And the safeguarding literature is really helpful to understand some of this. The other thing is, and I got a slide of a girl going across probably campus or something in a wheelchair, and I say, "Do you look?" Right? What do you do when you see somebody with an obvious disability coming towards you?
Hmm.
Oh, look over there, right? Or do you stare at them, right? Well, how do
Hmm.
you handle that kind of situation? And I think most of us um, just stare away and don't look at them because
Hmm.
I don't want to do the wrong thing, right? So they
Hmm.
remain invisible, which may or may not be their
Hmm.
choice, but there's
Wow.
not much they can do about it. I mean, you can take your kid with disabilities to a restaurant and find that people sitting near you move their table
Hmm.
to sit somewhere else because they don't want to be bothered by some kid who's doing odd things. And I
Hmm.
kind of get it, but it's so a lot of parents just hide
Hmm.
their disabled kid away because they don't
Hmm.
want to have to deal with that.
Hmm.
Yeah, dang, I hope.
Yeah. So
Well, I
that's
know.
kind of generally what I'm talking about is how is
Uh,
the need to be invisible sometimes and the courage to see people. How do
oh.
we actually see them and
Hmm.
break through that difference? But you got to have the courage. I said courage to see them because you don't know what to say. God, this guy here, he just said he lost two children in a car accident. What do I say?
Hmm.
Well, he's like, tell
Yeah.
me about that. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, there are things we can say, but we're so scared of saying the wrong thing
Hmm.
that we avoid. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, that's what I'm going to talk about.
Wow. That's going to be really interesting.
Yeah,
I
hope
hope
there's a
so. I hope
recording.
so.
Yeah. Wow. And it sounds kind of existential too, you know? It seems like you're kind of keeping the existential part of Adler alive.
Yeah. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, Del, but
Hmm.
yeah, absolutely. There's what is the meaning of existence, and especially of existence when you have these kinds of situations? How does it affect your sense of meaning in life?
And also, I see it connects to the psychology of use too. So these people have experienced profound loss, profound grief. What can we help them to see that they're still useful with? You know, I don't know if
Well,
that's kind of where you're going
absolutely. I mean,
too.
that's
Yeah.
I did something with my son with disabilities, right?
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
involved. And with the grief, I give lectures on grief all the time, and I always lectured on it in my classes.
Hmm.
Um, People need to hear this stuff.
Hmm.
Although I'll tell
Hmm.
you, the most sensitive people as a group that I experienced through all of this was undergraduates.
Hmm.
They somehow were able to get it and to
Hmm.
see me.
Yeah. Like,
My colleagues in the psychology department, not so much.
Yeah,
can I ask,
interesting.
in those lectures, do you choose to not be invisible about your own
Yeah, I
experience?
choose not to be invisible because, I mean, you have to choose your moments, right?
Hmm.
I mean, I can't walk around with a button saying, my kids died.
Hmm.
So it's a fine line between how much and when you self-disclose stuff, right? So self-disclosure is one of those tricky things. And in training to be a
Hmm.
therapist, you talked about therapist
Hmm.
self-disclosure and when do you do it, when do you not do it, and probably discouraged from doing it in general. Um, but this is true in every situation. When is it appropriate
Hmm.
to let people know? And so I'm kind of, man, I'm really open, I'm really out, right? But
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
but in a lot of situations, I wait until I get to know somebody to a certain extent, because then
Hmm.
I think maybe that person will know me well enough to know that they can ask and we can have a conversation about that.
Well, and Tim, also, I was thinking about your greeting to the garbage collectors. Those are invisible people, are they not? And you connected with them, and the surprise that they had from you connecting with them. I mean, that's just so Adlerian. That's just good stuff. Wow.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I really like I don't like lots of people that much, but individuals I'm really fond of. Pull from my Jungian background too. I'm very much an introvert.
Yeah, yeah.
But connecting, I mean, that's what it's all about, Dale. I mean, this
Hmm.
is this is central to Adlerian psychology.
Hmm.
Connecting and contributing,
Hmm. Yeah.
setting aside our
Wow.
safeguarding needs and just do something with your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the kind of
Awesome.
psychology of use.
Play the
Well, I could
cards
never
you.
do that. You hear that from people? You hear that from clients? Well, I could never do that.
Hmm.
Why not?
Why not?
Love
Yeah.
that confrontation when it's the best time to use a why question, right? It's like, why
Hmm.
not?
Yeah.
Why? You
Hmm.
know? Yeah,
Yeah.
put them
Oh.
on the spot there. Well, you think I could? I had two
Encouragement,
undergraduate
encouragement.
students who went out to as a project for my class to be an extrovert for a day.
That's it.
That's a great idea.
It didn't work the first time for either one of them, but the second time actually it did pretty much. And so, you know, it's yeah, it was fun to see them get interested.
Experimentation, right?
It's all right.
Experimentation.
Experimentation, sure.
Yeah.
And
That's
act
Yeah,
as if
Adler.
being. So you're acting as if you're already that thing that you want to
ex-
Mhm.
be. Acting as
exactly,
if. Yeah.
Acting as if, yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it's classic Adlerian.
Yeah. Wow. Wow, this has
Yeah.
been nice.
All right, Shay, it's your time to do a rigorous lifestyle assessment.
Oh boy. Buckle up. I wanted to know about could you tell us about your constellation, your family constellation, where you come from, where you're at in that?
I'm third out of four,
Hmm.
three boys and a girl. So
Hmm.
I got two older brothers. Intact family, nice family. Um, there was a 5 year gap between my next older brother and me, but I never felt that in terms of lifestyle that was really separated us. And well, I mean, of course, it did a little bit because I raised my younger sister, so there was that aspect of oldest sneaking in there. But but yeah, it was. I was in this training with Bob Powers and Jane Griffith. Went to three classes that they taught for their America's Institute of Adlerian Psychology, and he did a birth order thing in which he had firstborns go up the front of the class and talk about that experience, and then youngest and so forth. And then at the end, there were two of us left, and he said, "So what are you?" And we were both third out of four.
Wow.
And
Mm.
he looked at Jane and he said, "Do you think that'd be very interesting to do?" And Jane said, "Yes, we have to do everybody." So this guy and I went up in front and we were talking about our position, and the audience was laughing a bit. It wasn't very, I was class probably 10, 12 people. And then Bob's broke in and said, "You know why we're laughing?" I said, "Yeah, we're funny. I don't know." He said, "Because you guys are up there talking to yourselves. We can't hear a word. It's like you don't you don't really want anybody else to hear." And I was thinking, well, yeah, you told me we weren't very interesting, but it was kind of like I felt that we were this guy and I were really had this thing in common where, the third boy kind of an afterthought, especially when there's a younger sister. And I think
Hmm.
he had the same thing. Um, so yeah, it was a perfect expression of my birth order.
And the
Wow.
middle
Well,
child is classically.
that's a great story. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you share an early positive recollection with us? One that means a lot or that you would say has sort of defined you over time?
Oh, I can do that. You can decide if it's positive or not. So it's first grade. So it's not young, because the young ones are not all that positive. Well, I don't know. Anyway, it's first grade. It's my very favorite early recollection. So you have to live with it. Um, so sometimes I was forgetful going to school, and I grew up in this little town of 2,500 people. So we walked to school, and so I might have paper, might have pencil, the basic tools of the trade. And there's one day in the classroom, and the teacher told us to take out paper and pencil, and I did not have a pencil. And so she put something on the board, I think. We had blackboards back then. And we were supposed to copy, probably. I can't remember what the assignment was, but I couldn't do it. Everybody else is suddenly busy doing it. And I was really annoyed with Barbara Chesbrough and Mary Catherine Eaton because they sat to my right and usually would see I didn't have a pencil and would offer it to me. But they weren't seeing me or whatever, so I don't know. So I was getting very, very upset, and finally I started to cry. And then when I was crying, the teacher noticed me. She said,
Hmm.
"Timmy, what's the matter?" I said, "I don't have a pencil." And this amazing thing happened. Everybody in the room turned and offered me a pencil.
Yeah.
And I chose one from John Connor, who was sitting way up front and couldn't have seen me to begin with, so because we were facing the same direction. So I chose one from him, and then life was good.
Hmm.
And I know I wait to be offered pencils all the time in my life. I mean, it's part of the way I am. And I mean, I know it, so I don't I don't make it stupid, but I could still see the temptation to wait for someone to offer me a pencil when I'm in a difficult situation, as
Hmm.
opposed to other coping mechanisms like remembering to have one. Uh,
Hmm.
so yeah.
And you got to choose though when they
Oh, I
offered you
did get to
pencils.
choose. So
Yeah,
as I
that was
say, it's
kind of
not
cool.
necessarily a negative one because it ends very positively with me choosing to get a
Hmm.
pen and everybody offering me a pencil.
That's a neat
But the
story.
only way I could be noticed is to be unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the downside of it.
Hmm.
Right.
If I can look withdrawn, tearful, or whatever, then people will reach out. But if I just look
Hmm.
normally, no one gives a hoot, right? So,
Now
um,
put that with invisibility.
That's exactly where my brain's at
Yeah,
too.
we're all look at that.
yeah,
That's interesting, Tim. Wow. That's what you were thinking too, huh, Adam?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. How we can make ourselves less invisible through our body language. Right? It's
Hmm.
not just what we say.
Hmm.
But, right? It
Yeah.
conveys a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
yeah. It
Wow.
always amazes me how some people can just disappear.
Mm,
Hmm.
Teaching classes, you got 45, 50 students out there, and some you never see.
Hmm.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe just a couple logistical questions. Um, any books that you would recommend Adlerians read? Like anything that just pops off that bookshelf of yours?
Yeah. The Courage to Be Disliked is really a very fine book. Um, I've read in it several times and then I've read read all the way through, and it's challenged me because it's provide the philosophy, because Adlerian psychology is different from other schools of therapy because
Hmm.
there is. a philosophy there.
Hmm.
And so I found it's enormously useful.
Yeah, I
In
think
the
it'd be a
early
great
days,
intro book.
it was Manister and Corsini and individual psychology.
Mm.
Hmm.
Um, and that book is fun because he acknowledges me in the,
Nice.
Oh, that's good.
but I had nothing to do with the book.
Oh,
He wrote a book on adolescence, and he called me one day and he said, "I want to, one of your papers you wrote for my class. I just couldn't say it any better, so could I just take what you wrote, and then I'll put you in the preface?" And I said, "Sure, guy, you can do that." Well, the book comes out, and I go, "Hey, look, I'm not there."
oh.
And I said, "The guy, you said I would be there." So I think that's why he put me in this other book, um, to compensate. Um, I reread it, maybe 2 years ago. It's not as good as I remembered it. And the stuff they have, and I think this is mostly Corsini making this big deal about what's therapy and what's counseling.
Mhm, mhm,
And I don't make a distinction, but they
Mm.
do. Therapy is what we think of as treatment, but counseling is giving advice. And I went,
mm.
no,
No, huh?
we don't advise, we don't give advice. This is one of the first things I taught my students. Um, so I think it was really good at the time. I'm not sure I would recommend it anymore. I still think Children of the Challenge is an excellent book.
Yeah. That book never gets old. It
I
it
agree.
it, it goes with each generation. It fits. I talked to so many school counselors who just love that book. And even recent graduates.
Yeah, I give it to some new parents. I don't think they ever read it, which discourages me. But if you read this, it'll really help you in raising your kids.
Mhm, mhm.
And if you want to be found, are there places that people could find you or get in touch with you or support your work?
Well, I'm all over the internet if you just Google my name, but
Okay.
um, absolutely. I get emails I got one today from parents all the time of kids with Chart syndrome. Um,
Mhm,
this one was just a brag about she's now going to be working with some deafblind kids in the schools, and she's so excited.
mhm,
Um, but often it's my kid's doing this, and what do I do? I
mhm,
don't know, but
mhm,
I try to be useful if I can. Um,
mhm.
so I mean, I can give you an email address if that's helpful because I don't mind people contacting me.
Sure, I can pop it in the description of this video.
Okay, well, the easiest way to do it is just tim.hartshorn at CMich, CMICH, because that's Central Michigan, CMICH.edu. And
Sounds great. That's how
that'll
I
get
found
to
you.
me. I
Yeah.
get to,
Okay, well, thanks so much, Tim and Dale and Shay. Um,
yeah.
as
Well,
always, call to other Adlerians out there to get in touch with us if you'd like to be interviewed as well and have your brain picked. But again, thanks so much, Tim. And we'll see you all later.
Thank you,
I enjoyed it.
Tim.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
The world unfolds, a learning.